2, 1, now. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is new. I'm talking first, but I'm Merps. And also here, I don't really care. I'm just going to keep on talking because I might not ever have this opportunity ever again. We are in the new meta, yeah, it's pretty, I was about to say exciting, but that's not the right word for it. It's pretty something, and we will describe that something in the next 45 minutes with someone else who's also here. So someone else, what do you think?
I have an existential crisis right now. I don't really know if I'm here or if I'm somewhere else or if I'm anywhere at all.
I
I don't
don't,
know how to resolve this. I guess
yeah.
I'll keep talking though, because that seems to be something that is compelled within me to do right now at this moment. So I'm going to start by apologizing to Blizzard because I got one thing wrong. Well, Merps did too. In our last Lightforge, which was on the offering rates, and we made a big deal out of it because it was very ridiculous, and it was very ridiculous because it wasn't true. So that all kind of makes sense. I mean, okay, it's bad anyway, so it's only like half an apology, but we
Never
thought it was worse
actually
than it was.
apologize.
No, it's an
Oh.
apologize, but it's like a 50%. Like we take 50% of it back, and what it is we had thought that because I can't read, and we all know that I can't read, and so sometimes it gets me in trouble. But I had thought that there was a reduction in common classic neutrals, and we thought it was about 50%. In any case, it was going to be more than 20%. But as it turns out, it was just classic neutrals, just all of it. So I made a big deal about how ridiculous it was that they wanted to see more MCTs in the meta than they want to see Yetis. But no, that's not true. They don't want to see either MCTs or Yetis in the meta.
Oh, okay.
Or like, whatever epic version of it, like Big Game Hunter, right? Like, didn't want to see any of that in the meta. So all of that is
Okay.
reduced by 50%. So that's better because we didn't want we that was a weird thing to draw a distinction on, and they didn't do that, so it was good. But that's still bad because we still think that the neutral backbone of the arena should be represented somehow, right?
Got it. Got it.
So that's what I mean by it's half an apology. We did get it wrong, and so it's the whole position sounded way more ridiculous than it actually was. But the position is still something that like very much we fundamentally disagree with.
That's
So it's a
true. That we did trust your mathematical calculations and your reading skills.
oh! I want to pat myself on the back. My mathematical calculations were all correct because they weren't mine; they were arena drafts. So
Oh,
they were all
okay.
correct. And this is now confirmed by Hearth Arena, which published the stats today on Reddit. So now we actually have like convergence that everyone thinks the stats are the same thing. So the second thing I want to jump right into this is what the offering rates actually are, which is that everything we said in the last podcast was correct, except for this one point, and that one point is because I couldn't read. So all the neutral cards are reduced in offering rate by 50% compared to where they would be if this thing didn't happen. So they're like all like flame strikes, but like offered half as much because they're neutrals and they were never class cards. So your hierarchy is like neutral cards and then followed by like flame strikes and then followed by like class minions and then followed by class spells. So I'll go into more detail about the parts that we couldn't confirm because Kickstarter didn't give us that information, but Hearth Arena has the data. And so it's only been one day, but this is like literally everything that they see. So like there's no interpretation going on here. Their algorithm isn't doing any work here. This is like very trustworthy stats here, which is that spells, the increase in spells, which we thought were 20% because Ixar said 20%, is actually 75%. Ixar is one of the developers of Team 5. And it's not because Ixar's lying to us, but it's because Ixar meant, and we should have caught on to this because he did rarities the same way, he meant that the whole pool of spells, like if you counted the number of spells in your deck, it would be increased by 20%. Or like the number of spells you were offered is going to increase by 20%. But each individual spell increases by 75% because of all the complications that go there. So we know it's 75% now. And that's a much bigger deal than we thought because we were going by 20%. And one of our comments is why even do it, right? Like 20% is not terribly huge. But now it makes more sense. It's 75%. And if you're wondering now why you're seeing all these like dooms and like especially lightning storms, oh my God, lightning storms in the meta right now, it's because there's a 75% spell increase rate. So there's that. Next is that weapons, which we were like, we don't know if it's part of spells or not, but it better be because it makes no sense if they're not. It's not part of spells. It's like literally just spells.
We did get confirmation about that, and that's kind of BS.
Yeah.
Because if you think, okay, look, they're raising spells, and one of the big questions that we asked last time was, what's the difference between spells and battlecry minions, right? What really is the difference between spells and weapons? Not a lot. Like really not a lot.
Like spells more.
Yeah.
That's the difference right now. And so
Yeah.
spells are 75% more, which means that all of the like minions are like less because spells take up more room, but like only a little bit less. Because spells don't take up that much more room because there's not that many spells in the game.
Right.
But if you're looking for like, what are my chances to get like a blizzard or a lightning storm? The answer is insanely high right now. That's why you will see blizzards everywhere and lightning storms everywhere, and you should really play around these cards. Like, I just always assume my opponent has a lightning storm until they prove me otherwise, and then I assume that there's like a 50% chance in his next 5 top decks that he'll get one. Because they're everywhere, and they're good cards. And in case you're wondering, really, I'm playing around Blizzard? Blizzard is now offered twice as often as Flame Strikes. You should not play around Flame Strikes anymore. But you should definitely play around Blizzards.
Yeah. So, thank you for all of those numbers and fancy widgets and whodats and all that stuff. Hopefully you were right this time. I'm too lazy to check, so great work, and yeah, good stuff, man. I totally listened to what you just said.
Merps, arena expert, caring about the arena offering rates.
Good stuff, dude. Thumbs up. 2 thumbs up from me, all right?
All right, well, since you're hosting this now, are we moving on to the next topic? What's going on?
Yes, we're moving on to deep fried meta. No, that's probably what, Twilight Zone? Why am I thinking of that? Why did I think of the
Because
Twilight
we're in
Zone?
the Twilight Zone right now.
Oh, good transition.
Have you seen what's going on right now? Not only is it totally not normal, not sane, and weird, but it's also spooky. It's also very spooky because there are a lot of scary, scary things that just come at you, and you are not prepared.
You mean 5 AoEs in a row? You mean...
I mean like 5 legendaries in a row,
Sure.
5 AoEs in a row, 5 everythings in a row. We literally just faced like 5 people who played Kraken on turn 9.
Yeah.
Like... We didn't like that's just that's the new meta. It's the new meta, and we're going to deep fry it. And the first thing to know is that we were right about pretty much everything we said in the last podcast. And we said we gave at least 12 very solid predictions, and they're all right. So I'm patting myself on the back right now, because it's pretty obvious that they're all correct if you just play the arena or you watch anyone else play the arena. And again, it wasn't that hard to predict. Like, what I like to say about our predictions is not that we're super smart and so we can predict everything. It's that it's the arena. It's really easy to predict everything.
Welcome to the Lightforge, where we use this as a platform to congratulate ourselves on everything that we do well.
Yes.
Definitely.
But in all seriousness, we were not the only ones who predicted the things. I think we were more specific than other people, and we talked for longer and made more points that broke them out. But everyone had the same gist.
Right.
And we're all right. There wasn't a ton of disagreement or anything like that.
And it wasn't that hard to see either.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And that's why we got on Blizzard. It's because Blizzard knew this was coming. They didn't even have to test it to know what was coming, but they also tested it apparently. So they really knew what was happening. What you see now is exactly what Blizzard intended.
Yeah.
This was a change many, many, many months in the making. It's arena, so the changes and the impact from the changes are very obvious to all the people who are really good at the arena and stream and write stuff about it and whatever.
Right. So ADWCTA, we're talking about the meta, and you're like, I was right. Ha ha ha. My name is ADWCTA. I'm always right. I added a little. I've been working on my ADWCTA impression. But
thanks.
So
it's dead on.
It's pretty freaking good, right? A lot better than my arena play. But tell me, we're talking about how you were correct. How were you correct? Tell us about the meta.
Oh, about the meta. Okay, so let's recap the last episode in really, really quickly in terms of words, because I don't want this to go on for 3 hours again. Okay, I'm gonna get my notes again. I'm gonna tell you exactly what our whole thing was. So first of all, Curve on 2 is dead. That's the first thing that happened. And that's not to say that no one will ever curve out on 2. What it means is you're highly, highly unlikely to get curve on 2, and if you continue drafting as if you want a 2 curve, like any kind of 2 curve, you're going to have a lot of bad drafts, because every time you try to draft a 2 curve and you don't actually get enough cards for a 2 curve, then you're just screwing yourself the rest of the time, because then you have these 2 mana cards that are very, very small compared to your opponents. You just lose a card. It's like giving your opponents free Azure Drakes, right? You don't want to do that in a value meta. So if you can actually, so you average, I think I said you would average, people would average like 2 2-drops or like 3 2-drops depending on the class. Like if you're a class with class 2-drops, you would average like 3 3.5. If you're a class without it, you'd average 2 2.5, something like that. That's pretty much what's happening right now. So you may sometimes see a deck that's still wild from before, but that's going to happen less and less frequently for everyone else. And when you're drafting, don't take 2-drops. And if you are to take 2-drops, 3 2s are much better than 2 3s. 2 3s are awful. 2 3s are awful. Why? Because there are no more other 2-drops for you to trade into for the most part. So if you see decks that are very high in win rates, they don't have 2 3s.
Yep.
Because you shouldn't be taking those things, because you took 2 3s before because you needed a 2-drop curve, and because 2 3s traded into 3 2s just as well, and they're actually better against 1-drops. Now 1-drops still exist because of Mistress of Mixtures, and 2 3s are great to deal with Mistress of Mixtures, but that's about it. That's like way too specific for you to do that on.
Right. People will still draft like Worgen Infiltrators, right, or Mistress of Mixtures, because they're so good against 3 2s. Yes. And Worgen, you can always hide it. It's like a delayed Holy Smite or something, right?
Yes.
So people still draft those. But other than that, you know, your 2 3s, as soon as it's past turn 2, which people miss, you know, your 2 3 goes up against the higher gun, and you inevitably slow down because you need that 1 extra damage.
Yes.
So there's a problem.
That's right. Go.
No. Go on. That's it.
Okay, so I thought we're ending this. If you have more to say, go.
No, so that's sort of the new meta, right? In terms of like, that's an introduction to how the game plays out. Lots of times the game, quote, sort of begins on turn 3 now, right? Yes. We've never had that before, by the way. It's always started on at least turn 2, and then during the more aggressive metas, it definitely started on turn 1, right? Yes. Turn 1s, like when like GVG came out, you know, it started with zombie chows. It started with web spinners. It started with 1-drops. Now you could sort of say we start off at like the 2.5 drops, right? Or even the 3-drop. Because it's not, like ADWCTA says, even if you have a playable card on 2, a lot of times it's something like a Grime Street Informant or even like a Jeweled Scarab, right? Cards that I will definitely draft, but you can't consider a 2-drop. So
right. You can't consider it a 2-drop. Okay, so one caveat to this, which we mentioned in the class sections, but I guess in the last Lightforge we didn't really mention it with the whole 2-drop things, but it fits into here, especially because one of the classes is actually the most played class. It's Mage, so we really should talk about it. And Mage is still like the best class, and that is that the Mage and the Druid can play 2 3s. Sort of, because they have a ping.
Yeah.
So if you play a 2 3, your opponent plays a 3 3 or a 4 3, which is the next point. They're most likely to play 3-drops. Then you can get your way out of it. It's not great. You lose tempo or whatever, but in a value meta, it doesn't matter that much, right? So that is kind of an exception. But also, you might take 2 3s with Druid and Mage, because you can actually sort of like, those are the 3.5 2-drops per run classes. So if you get a bunch of 2-drops in the beginning that you are like forced to take or whatever, then you can really build it out from there, right? Like if in my first 5 picks I get 2 3 2s that I would normally take anyway, I am now favored to have a curve on 2 if I'm Mage or Druid.
Right.
And I could take the 2 3s and I could take the 3 2s and I have a curve. And you know who doesn't have a curve? Everyone else. So I can build a semi-successful like aggro deck. So it's not like a totally dead archetype to like build out your 2 curve. But it's much more situational. It's much more based on your early draft and how it goes.
Yeah.
If you get the normal expected amount of 2-drops in the early going, which is like 0.5, so I guess 1 by turn 10, by pick number 10, you're not going down that path.
Nope.
And that's going to happen more often than not.
Okay. So when you were tweeting out previously as well, you were talking about, it's like there are these 2 archetypes, right, that are successful in today's meta.
Yes.
So
but why don't we finish talking about what the meta is that we said it was?
Oh, that's it.
First, let's do that first.
Well, it seems like you have more to share. So what do you have?
Yeah. Well, what we said last week was also the 3-drop meta was shifting hard, right?
Yep.
4 3s over 3 4s because Spider Tank is gone, and the 4 3s now make up a whole lot of the 3-drop minions, and the rest are made up of 3 3s because also all the rares are 4 3s, right? You have Light's Champion, I think, and Injured Blade Master, and that one that gives you immunity.
Violent Illusionist.
Violent Illusionist.
Good
Yeah.
job knowing the names of cards.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, so that's definitely happening. There are a lot of 4 3s. You see 4 3s a lot. And
Yes.
4 3s are
definitely.
also good. Yeah, and 4 3s are also good because if there's no 2-drop meta, 4 3s are only potentially trading up. So they're extra good against possible 4-drops. Which means for 4-drops, 3 5s are good again. Your 5 4s are worse again. Everything shifts, right? And so Curvestone still exists. Like, don't think Curvestone is dead. It just starts on 3 now. And if you can make Curvestone start earlier, then you're at a huge advantage when it comes to Curvestone.
That's if. Yes.
Yes.
Like, and the problem always with starting one turn earlier is the later, like, you run into AoE one turn earlier, right? And the more powerful AoEs as well. So what happens for aggro decks, and if you play Constructed, you know how important one turn is, right? Because in one turn, especially like you're missing the snowball turns and you're missing that one turn before the AoE in which you get like 12 or 15 damage to the face. Like you're missing that turn. So like that's sort of one of the issues you could potentially run into with trying to sort of not trade on the board, play a little bit more aggressively if you're starting at the same time as your opponent. But, those all change if you are starting from turn 1.
Yes, exactly. So all of this builds up to what people call the value meta, which is kind of true, but it's really more of like a threat and an answer meta, which is like Magic the Gathering sealed.
Yep.
Like, you're a Magic the Gathering person and you play a limited format, you know what's happening. Whoever has more big things wins. You save your big removals for their big things. You don't want to be the first person on the board unless you're one of the classes that have buffs.
I have a different name for this. All right.
Yeah.
I call it the non-commitment meta.
That's good.
It's good, right? Yeah, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
All right. It's not just about my fear of relationships anymore. Okay. It's also about my fear of getting removed on the board, and we will talk about that later, and not talk about anything that has to do with my personal life. So let's continue on with that.
Yeah. So why would you play something on the board, let's say a 4-5, when your opponent is just going to play a 5-6? Well, you would only play it if, one, you had a good way to remove the 5-6.
Right.
Then you play a 4-5, you're like, whatever, I get some damage to his face, and I'm not afraid if he plays a bigger thing that's going to eat mine. But if you don't have that removal, you may have a buff. So if he plays a bigger minion, you just buff it. And if he removes your minion, who really cares, right? He's burned a removal on your minion. You played a threat. He played a more valuable answer, right? You'd like that trade.
Sure.
You're getting value because he fireballed your Yeti. On the other hand, if you don't have any of these things to back it up, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, right? You're more often going to have these responses in your hand than you would have before this meta. But the rate only went up by maybe 50%, maybe a little bit more than that. And before, you rarely had these answers, right? Before, you had 2-3 answers in your entire deck. So now you have 4 or 5 answers in your deck. You're still not guaranteed to have it in your hand. Or you may have just used it the previous turn. Anyway, if you don't have an answer in your hand, you can't put something on the board. Because as soon as you put something on the board, your opponent will put down a more favorable trade, and they will get the trade. So this is boiling down to this very simple game where, can I protect the thing on the board? If yes, I put things on the board. If no, I do weird things on the board.
Right. Okay, so for example, these days when I'm drafting, right, and especially when I'm playing, what am I comfortable playing? And this is assuming that neither you or your opponent, you guys are sort of playing the standard quote meta, right, where you guys probably don't have anything on 2, you play on, so you're kind of starting on 3 because the draft is trending that way, and you guys are trying to play a sort of a control-y type of deck, right? So in these sort of matchups, what am I comfortable playing onto the board? Am I comfortable playing that Boulderfist Ogre? I'm much more comfortable playing the Cabal Chemist or the Tomb Spider, right? Those are the things that I don't even need to think about playing those because I'm like, I don't care what you do with this.
Yep.
It's like
Your
this
bonus,
is
you get a card anyway.
right. Get a card anyways, or like the premiums are obviously stuff like Ethereal Conjurers, right, where you get something out of it. And this is why I call it the non-commitment meta. You don't commit to the Boulderfist Ogre. You don't commit to like the Captured Warmonger, right?
I think
Like,
there are many reasons you don't commit to the Boulderfist Ogre, but that's just my
I don't know what the ogre has done to you, all right? But I don't want to know.
Wanna know.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know what the Boulder Fist Ogre has done to you. But that's what I want to call the non-commitment meta, because you sort of get into this position where you're not really sure what the opponent has, but you're 100% sure that they have a high chance of being able to deal with like if you go sort of all in on a minion.
Yeah, the more you go all in on anything, the more you get screwed. That's
Right.
always been true, but now their chances of being able to screw you is a lot higher. So you just don't go all in on stuff. There's no reason to go all in on stuff. You used to go all in on stuff because tempo was important, because like you were able to like secure kills and things like that. And these days, tempo is only important for one reason, which is reach. You only want tempo on the board if you want to swing, hit his face, and then immediately finish him off the next turn. And you're able to do that now. So this is the one thing. I tweeted out before that there are now two archetypes, or I wrote on Reddit, there are now two archetypes that are mainly used, one of which is the value one that we've been keeping talking about, and then there's another one. And here's what the other archetype is. And we didn't specifically call it out, and so we missed it. So, but it wasn't like we said that wasn't going to work. It uses the same, and we should have seen it, because it literally uses the same card set that we are telling people to draft. So your drafting wouldn't be any different. It's just your playstyle would be different. And what it is because there are, and this is also partly due to the fact that the spell bonus was much higher than we expected.
Right, right.
But what it is because you're drafting all the removals anyway in a value meta, and half the removals can go face, you also have a burst reach deck, just like by default, by doing your normal drafting.
Yeah, definitely.
There's no skill in drafting. There's none of this other stuff. You just get it or you don't get it, right? And if you do get it, what happens if you have 15 burn damage in your hand? Well, when your board looks like a Yeti and like a 3/3, you go face from when he has 25 health, and then you put more minions on there, and he doesn't remove all of them, and you hit face again, and you just win the game.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you win the game in 2 turns from having like a totally randomly normal board state on turn 7. So like, as soon as he stops having the answers for literally every one of your minions, you win. And it's not because you were good at tempo, and it's not because you were good at drafting, and it's not because you synergized your card. It's because you managed to be offered cards that could go face and could remove your opponents. That's all. And if that happens, you have what we'll call a burst face deck.
Burst face deck. Okay, I think you could have thought of something a little catchier, but okay, we can call it that.
A large smork deck?
No.
A directly
definitely,
smorking deck?
Definitely not. Just go back. Okay, we can.
A pyroblast deck?
We'll figure out a name. But
okay.
So, you've talked about some of these traits. So I guess what this deck, and I've played this deck, this sort of deck as well, right? Like, not in this meta, but I played it before. I think Rogue is a good example, right? Rogues can definitely play in this style. So it's not really so much, like, they definitely commit some to tempo, right? You definitely have to commit a little bit to tempo. But at the same time, it's like tempo and flexibility, and you just sort of flip the switch at some point, right? Yep. And say, these eviscerates are not going to minions anymore. This Cold Blood is not being used to trade anymore. Because Cold Blood could be a tempo-oriented trade, right? 1 mana for 4 extra damage. So if you have a 2/2, you could trade into like their 6/6, which is really great. But at a certain point, so it plays in this rogue sort of style.
Switch deck.
Yeah. So like a flip the switch deck, which sort of hunters and rogues, but especially rogues, have been really good at doing.
Yeah. So before you had like a flip the board deck, right?
Yeah.
Where like, because it was actually board centric, the meta, you got to a certain point, you play like your board clears or whatever, and then you get on the board on the same turn and you flip the board, right? Like Warlocks were really good at it because of Abyssal Enforcer, right? You have like people, a lot of classes were able to do it, but like Rogues and Warlocks were especially good at it. So this is like the flip the switch, go face.
Right.
where your removals become face damage because you have a board, they can't totally remove it, and you hit them. Okay, so why wouldn't you be able to do this in every meta besides the fact that, you're limited by your spells? Because normally, taunts meant something. Like, taunts really used to mean something. They mean you couldn't hit me in the face.
Right.
Taunts mean nothing now.
Yeah. They mean so little now.
If you are still relying on taunts to protect your minions or your face, you're doing it wrong. Because all taunts do is get removed. Because there's a lot of removals now. Those removals that could have gone to your face? Well, they could go to taunts too. And they could use the removals that can't go face on taunts also. And there's like double the amount of, once you have those in. So your taunts are not standing up. If your opponent has an aggressive agenda, he's saving something for the taunt. Like, that's happening. That you're not getting away with taunting and then doing something. You have to always play, whenever you play a taunt, as if it's just a bonus.
Yes. So here's and here's what ADWCTA is talking about, kind of. If I can try to explain it somewhat. Whenever you play a taunt, inside of your head, you're making, or you should be making, an internal calculation of how much am I relying on this taunt, right? Mm-hmm. As in, like, am I putting this down and saying, like, man, this thing better, like, be able to, like, soak in the damage I hope it soaks in, or else, like, it's terrible, right? Because I have like a 10-1 behind it, or something, and I need this taunt to to be good. Otherwise, maybe you have a better play in which you could actually tempo out more and not rely on the taunt so much, not go all in on the taunt, right? Yes. If in your head you're just saying, well, I just need to play something big, and I just happen to play a Lord of the Arena, and you know what, this is pretty good, because it also protects my 4-1 behind it. Sure.
That's fine.
That's fine.
That's what taunts are used for now.
Right. But do not count on those taunts for, your calculation has to change, because the percent chance that you can actually deeply rely on the taunt is significantly lower now. Yep. So, and if you're, an Infinite Arena player, you should know what I'm talking about, like this internal calculation and this measurement of how much am I relying on this taunt as you're putting it out.
So, like, you remember the OG meta and how, like, they added a whole bunch of taunts, and then everything was just on the board, and you couldn't be aggressive at all at any point because the taunt was going to come down and ruin your day? That was only because you couldn't remove the taunts. Right. They fixed that problem. Now you can remove the taunts. And so now it means there's no more, like, OG had a bunch of taunts and it focused on the board play. This new meta is answer and response.
Yes.
So what is your taunt to an aggro deck? It is a threat to the aggroness of the aggro position that your opponent just took. So what's he going to do? He's going to respond. And that's it. And whether you have a threat or a response, that's not determined by you. That's determined by your deck.
Yes.
And how do you get your deck? By picking cards. Now, would you select a threat or a non-threat? You would select a threat. Would you select an answer or a non-answer? You would select an answer. There's no magic to it. There's no deep thinking to it. Your curve that you have to fill and manage and wait, like, the things you have to give up in a draft to get other things has dramatically decreased. Drafting has become very, very simple, and gameplay has become even simpler.
Because if you are drafting threats and answers, those help make up for a curve. Because those answer your opponent's curve, right? In terms of, so if you have enough answers and if you have enough threats as well, like, you can play this sort of seesaw battle where you don't need to play on, like, you don't need to put out, like, minion, like, threat, right? And then all you have to do, because your opponent probably trips up somewhere as well, you just need to make sure that you play the last threat or you play the last answer or something. So you can see it becomes this game where both players at the beginning should be a little bit cautious, right?
Very cautious.
Yeah, should be a little bit cautious. And, sometimes it's turn 3, you drop the hired gun. It doesn't matter. You just drop the hired gun.
It's your smallest card anyway.
Right. So when I say, like, beginning of the game, I'm actually talking about, like, turn 5. Turn 5 is when sort of, like, the weird stuff happens, right? Mm-hmm. And during that turn, you want to start being a little bit careful, and you want to start saying, like, man, my opponent still has, like, quite a few cards in their hand, which they should, because it's the new meta. And you're like, I can't make any good reads. Let's be a little bit careful here. Let's play, like, maybe let's play something that doesn't go all in, right?
Yep. So, in case you're like everyone, if you play the arena, you know that games usually go for longer. The point at which it is determined by the game which player has won is now earlier than it was in the MSG meta.
But you
Now, it's
don't
not
know
as
it.
bad as
But
like the
you just don't
GVG
know
meta.
it.
Like the GVG meta was determined on turn 3. It was ridiculous. It was crazy. It was
Yeah,
bad.
yeah.
The determination is later now, but it's definitely a step back from the previous meta in which it was determined very late in the game.
Right.
Here, the game drags on for like half the game before the game already knows based on top decks and your
Right,
answer
right.
responses and how you've played up to that point, like who's going to win.
Right.
Like you could be ahead, but that doesn't mean anything if your opponent's about to drop like Alex Straza on you or like, you know, Onyxia, because there's a lot of legendaries. It doesn't matter if he has 2 Krakens coming up
Yeah.
and you're going to draw a 3-drop and a 4-drop, right? Like this is all determined by Blizzard. This is not determined by you up to that point.
This
it's
is
not
a,
that you can't
right.
make a difference. I'm not saying like this is like not actually a slot machine. Like me and Merps did both get 12 wins on our first try hard run in the new meta. That wasn't an accident.
Well, we have a lot of new players coming in as well, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's like part of the meta being like, you know, like actually a lot simpler right now. I can't believe the amount of new players that must have come in to make the meta so much easier. Or maybe, and I also have, there's a lot of existing players who say like, oh my God, I can't win in the meta anymore. And that could be, I think, 2 very clear reasons. One is you've learned how to deal with the Curvestone meta, but you haven't like internalized how to play Hearthstone and the fundamental level. You've just like memorized a series of rules that you follow, both in drafting and or in gameplay, and those rules don't apply anymore. So you're still following those rules and it's actively hurting.
This is one of the biggest changes we've ever seen.
Yes.
So you need to.
No, it
really,
is the biggest change we've ever seen.
That's true. It is the biggest change. So you like the adjustment needs to come very quickly, right? And it's not just one thing or another. You have to like totally like shift the foundation of what you know.
Yep. And another thing that's going to be causing the player pool to get worse is that a lot of people still use Hearth Arena. And one thing Hearth Arena, the algorithm, is not going to do well is it's not going to deal with this meta well because it was built with the TGT meta in mind. All of its archetypes are TGT. In fact, its central archetype is the temple / mid-range archetype, which is the worst archetype right now and was also bad in MSG, but right now it's gotten to like ridiculous levels. And its assumptions about, you know, curve and all these other things are just like, I mean, they're outdated and whatever. And at least in the very early going, it was a compounded problem because anyone who followed any tier list, whether it's ours or Hearth Arena's, like also got screwed because the tier lists are all wrong.
Yeah.
We specifically say on our website, don't use the tier list right now.
No,
I'm going to update it in a week and a half. Don't use it for now. It doesn't do anything.
No, it does nothing. You heard it here first. Do not use it right now.
Do not use it right now. It doesn't do anything. It's like a whole different meta with whole different things. So Hearth Arena's updated their tier list. I don't know what they did with it. You can determine whether it's good or whether they did a lot, but they're still going to update it, and it's still not going to be great. But at least in the first couple of days, that wasn't updated either, and so like everything was wrong and everything was horrible, and so people were making like awful decks, and they're still making bad decks. And to the extent that you know you use that kind of program and you follow its advice, you're going to get bad results compared to the optimal drafting. And optimal drafting, this is the ironic part, and this is one of the parts about why I don't like this meta, is optimal drafting is really simple right now.
It actually is, yeah.
Like, this is not the old meta where it was actually difficult to draft and we had a lot of fun and a lot of thinking and a lot of deep discussions. Right now, optimal drafting is mostly pick the largest card. I'm going to break it down for you very simply. Here's the most practical advice you will get in terms of drafting. And I literally don't deviate from this at all. Except for that, what I was talking about before, which is the possible aggro route that certain classes can take.
Right.
You can ignore that and you'll be totally fine. And like I said, the 2 best archetypes, the value archetype and the, I guess, flip the switch archetype, use the same cards. Like, it's the same drafting process, just depends on which cards you get. And so what the drafting is you take the biggest card available, not the best card, the biggest card available by card advantage. So things that draw cards are very, very big.
Right. So we're not saying it's necessarily the Boulder Fist Ogre. Tomb Spider is a big card. It's actually a very big card, right? So that, you know, that's what we mean as well. Like, what's another sort of big card that you might not think of as a big card? Something like Cabal Courier, right? Like, that's a big card. So remember that we count those as a, quote, big card.
And like whatever the behemoth is, the 10 mana 10/10 or whatever, that's a big card too.
That's a real card now.
That's a real card. This is a totally legit card in the meta. So you do that. I would worry if you have too many like 8, 9, and 10 mana cards. Like, don't have more than like 5 or 6 of them. It's unlikely that you'll end up drafting 5 or 6 of them because you just won't be offered them. But like, that's my only like kind of hesitance. Like, I don't want that many of those cards. Like in the previous meta, I would say don't ever have more than 2 of those cards. You will lose.
Yeah.
But here you can have like 5 and it's okay. More importantly, so pick the biggest card, but make sure your deck has the following things. And it's a 15-15 split. You're going to get 15 big cards / utility cards, and then you're going to get 15 of the following things. 6 cards in the pool that I'm going to call early playability. And what that means, low mana playability, because you don't actually play them early necessarily, is that they are between 0 and 2 mana. Don't have to be curve cards. Don't have to be able to drop them on turn 2. Just later on, you're going to need to fill, like, you need choices, right? You still need to be able to make decisions in the arena. And to do that, you can't be like, oh, it's turn 5, I can only drop a 5 mana minion. Or to the extent that that's fine, you can't be like, oh, it's turn 8, I can only drop an 8 mana minion. At that point, you're not making you're not giving yourself the option to win because you're not like, you don't have any choices. So you need 2 drops at 2 mana cards at some point. You need 4 mana card, or like 3 mana cards at some point. You need 1 mana cards at some point. So you need 0 somewhere, like I like 6, but at the very minimum, I would need 4 0 to 2 mana cards, just so I can fill my curve later on and not have it be super awkward. Then you need 5 3-drops. 5 3-drops is important. You know, before it was like 4 3-drops, but that was because you needed to take into account 2s. Now you don't really need 2 drops. You have a lot more spaces open up. So you want 5 to make sure you hit that 3-drop. And because if you go second, you're usually 3 coining into 3.
Yes. Yep.
So you want more 3-drops for that. 6 3-drops is totally fine. That's not like too many 3-drops or something. Don't worry too much about your value because your 3-drops are mostly 4/3 anyway, and 4 is a decently high amount of attack that's still viable in the mid game. And then you want at least 4 4-mana cards. That's actually going to be the biggest issue that you're going to find in terms of drafting because you need at least that many to curve out on 4, but there are not enough 4-drops. So before you worried about 2-drops the most because there were not enough 2-drops ever. Well, like not recently. Now, like we said in the previous Lightforge, you don't have to worry about 3s. There are way more than enough 3s. But there are not enough 4-drops. You will not get your 4 curve half the time you draft, unless you're picking classes that have class bonuses to 4-drops. So you're going to have to kind of actually make a mental note. You can't wait for it to happen. When you see 4-drops, you have to kind of take them, especially if they're not 4 4s or 5 4s, because those get eaten up by 4 3s. So you got to put that in the back of your mind, but you want 4. So that's 6 ideally, and then 5 3s, and then 4 4s. So that's 15 cards. Your other 15 cards should all be big as possible, and if they're not big, they better be response cards. They better be answer cards. They better be a Frostbolt, you know? So there you go. That's your drafting process. You do that, and you're good to go, and you have a nice value deck and or a nice flip the switch deck, and you win this meta.
Yep. So
I wish there was more to that. There isn't.
Right. So look, you said a lot. I'm just God, what do I tackle first? You definitely need value in this meta, right? No matter if what sort of archetype, or if we're just using ADWCTA's 2 archetypes, right? Obviously, the control one, you need value. The other one, you need some sort of value in some way, right? Like hard removals, right? Able to go hard removals can be as big as possible. Those are always good to have. But what I found in this meta is the best cards are the ones that sort of split themselves in terms of whether it's a Tomb Spider that gives you half a body, or something with a battle cry, right? Battle cry is good, and if you're not drafting those, you better draft stuff that is at least a little bit tricky. I found that those big minions, even if they taunt, especially if they taunt, because we talked about how taunt is not great, right? Yeah. They just don't do enough. And so when I've been playing this meta, the question I've always asked myself is when am I uncomfortable the most, right? Because
Mhm.
I always want to do these self evaluations. Like, when am I uncomfortable, and when do I feel as if I'm really comfortable?
Yeah.
I'm most comfortable when my deck is filled with like the majority of my minions are actually like the tomb spiders, you know, like and stuff with battle cries or stuff that like splits up like a Silverhand Knight, or
Yep.
stuff that gives me some sort of advantage like an MCT or a second rate bruiser, right? Like just gives me a lot of tempo and a taunt, stuff like that. This the minions that just sort of get out there don't give me any sort of upper hand in terms of tempo, in terms of battle cry or anything. I I've lowered those on my mental tier list significantly, like significantly, and
Hmm.
even small stuff like Frostwolf grunts. I'm just like, you know what, absolutely fine. Like they protect me, and
Well, it's because their problem was that you needed twos to be on curve, so you could play them on curve, and two threes existed.
right.
Now two threes don't exist as much, and you don't need to play it on curve. You're just happy to play anything on curve if you get them on curve. You're much more likely to just throw them out later when you have two extra mana because you needed to play that 4 mana removal or whatever.
Right. And also, you want to draft towards your win condition now, right? Because what happens during the draft now, you can get like quite a lot of value cards. So you can just say, I'm playing towards my value cards. I'll use an example of a previous run. So I also had a 10 win Warlock, right? I had Doom, you know, your favorite card, like my favorite
Yep.
card now as well. And I was like, this is sort of my win condition. The deck was not really that good. I didn't have any Abyssals. I didn't have a Blast Crystal. I didn't have like Demon Synergy. I didn't have anything really. It was just, you know, typical minions.
This is what happens when you have like extra offering rates to legendaries and epics because a lot of those cards are win cards. Like we have a co-op deck
Yes.
going on right now
Yep.
where it's like the worst mage deck ever. Like if we drafted that value style, it would be one of the worst decks in this meta. Because also, just so you know, all the decks got better obviously because there are more like
Right, right,
cards in the meta and a spell bonus. And our deck was not able to compete. But we have a Pyroblast, so we drafted the Pyroblast. We actually have a two curve. We're
right.
doing this aggro style. Is it good? No, it's still a crappy deck. But we're winning enough games that, like, I don't know, if this ends at like 7 to 9 wins, I would not be surprised he got there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But in my Warlock draft, I drafted the Doom, and then after that, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna draft the ones, the twos.
Mm-hmm.
Sun Fury Protector, I took it over a really good rare. I forgot exactly what it was, and I basically told myself, okay, I'm gonna make it to turn 10 with like 20, like 18 to 20 HP, right? No matter
Yep.
what, I'm gonna make it to that turn, to turn 10. Good chance of drawing Doom with that amount of health. I play Doom, I draw like 6 cards, and what am I drawing into? I'm drawing into the cards that help take me there in the first place. The Shadow Bolts, the Sun Fury Protectors, like the Frostwolf Grunts, right? So like my whole entire deck sort of, you know, I'm not saying if I never draw Doom, I lose, because you know I could just play Warlock and make good trades and try to, you know, be smart
Yeah.
about my decisions as well. But basically every chance that I got to play Doom, I got there because I drafted towards it, and then all the cards that I drafted to try to get me to Doom, they're also great past Doom as well, right?
Right. But so the idea of what you did is you recognize that you're only going to win for the most part if Blizzard wanted you to win and gave you your Doom on time. Otherwise, you were going to have a low percentage. You're not dead, but you're creating a suboptimal deck.
Sure, yeah,
And you're saying, but because I'm drafting in this way, I know that if I get Doom, I am going to win, like almost always, because I
almost
have like
always.
this huge card advantage thing, and then I flip the board on them.
Because the way that you're playing, they see that you're on your back
Yep.
foot, right? Like I play the Frostwolf, like by turn 10, they have a dominating board presence and they play more into it.
Yes, that's the
Yeah,
key.
yeah,
Everyone's committing to stuff because you're used to committing to stuff because that's how you won an arena before.
yep,
You can't commit to things anymore because boards flip like crazy right now because there are all these epic cards that you didn't see before because there are legendary cards and because there's just all these big cards. Like before, you're never gonna see someone like if someone top decks 3 big cards in a row, you're like, oh my god, that's crazy. That happens all the time now. And if you
right,
miss like 1 or 2 cards, they now like if everyone's top decking on average middle minions that deal 4 to 5 damage, and then you miss one, they have a 4 to 5 damage card on the board hitting you, and it's not great if you have even if you have 30 health. But now if you miss one of your big cards and you instead have a 4/3 or whatever that takes away half the health of their 8/8, that's 8 damage hitting your face now. You have half the amount of turns you used to have to recover, so you just lose. Like, that's the RNG of the late game we have right now, where if you're in a vague top decking situation, the first person to get an advantage wins the game because they will hit you to the face if they're smart.
Yeah.
And if they already had a deck that hit you to the face anyway because they knew they had the spells to finish it, whenever they draw those spells, you are dead. It's about what they draw, which is about what they drafted, which is only about what they were offered.
Yep.
And then in the end, you receive a victory or a defeat. Now, you can mess it up, and a lot of people are doing that right now.
No, it's not totally skillless. No.
Yeah, people are messing up the draft because they're drafting like not for value, or they're trying to do a 2-curve in classes or in situations where it's very unlikely that they get there. They're playing by overcommitting. That's like a huge mistake. It's an answer and response meta, right? Like, why are you overcommitting anything? So, like, this is not that it is a brainless game. It is not slots, right? When we say the deck determines the outcome, what we mean is, and the skill ceiling of the arena has gone down drastically. But that doesn't mean that it's a no skill play mode. In fact, I'll tell you this, I think, and I'm hardly alone in thinking this, that the constructed skill ceiling in terms of gameplay is very low compared to the arena, especially historically.
Oh,
It is very low. Now, it's way higher when it comes to deck construction, assuming you're not net decking. Like, and it's even higher if you're trying to predict a tournament meta or like, anything like that. And that's how good players do it. That's how good players win. But once you're in the game, 2 players of like some, maybe like we'll say like 75% skill. If you're a 75 percentile skilled player and you're facing a top 1 percentile skilled player, the top 1 percentile skilled player, assuming you're using evenly matched decks and he hasn't meted you by picking a better, a deck that counters yours or like a deck that's better for the meta or whatever, then what's happening is he has like a 5% at most 10% chance to win over you.
Yeah. It's about that, 5 to 10%.
5 to 10%, and he's like really good, and you're like just kind of good. In the arena, with equally like powerful decks, a kind of good player will lose to the really good player like at least 30-40% more often.
Well, you have more opportunities to make mistakes, right? And you haven't memorized, because the first thing that you do with the deck is you get in constructed, you get rid of the quote skill needed to make the deck, right? Because assuming everyone knows the deck.
I'm taking the skill needed to make the deck out because I think there's a ton of skill needed to.
True. Yeah, even after that, because the decks just play out in a very linear fashion.
Yeah,
right?
Because you're facing the same decks.
Yeah, you are.
So you just memorize your patterns, and it takes a lot of skill to develop what those patterns are. But then afterwards, you just memorize your patterns, you play your patterns, and you get a victory or a defeat. And you're faced with new situations now and then. Otherwise, it's about how well you stick to your pattern.
I thought you had something after that.
Oh, no, I thought your connection broke down.
No.
But yeah, so that's generally what Constructed is about in the actual gameplay phase. Once you hit a certain skill cap, again, this is like, we're hitting skill caps here, right? Like, this is for good players. If you're like a average player in Constructed, you're going to get destroyed by good players. That's still going to happen because they're much better than you, right? But the skill cap and the soft skill cap, let's say, it's not like you get to one thing and that everyone's literally the same, but it evens out past a certain point a lot more. And for each incremental, like, if this person's thinking about it the right way by like 3 magnitudes of what the first person is, he's only going to get an extra like 1% win rate. That didn't happen in the old arena. Or I mean, it did, but it topped out way higher. And right now, it's decently low, I feel. And one of the reasons it is because it's much more like Constructed. Like, if you're wondering who really likes this meta, besides the fact that it's new and whatever, universally, Constructed players love this meta. Especially Constructed players who didn't play Arena before or didn't like Arena before.
It feels a little bit more like Constructed.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, it feels a lot more like Constructed compared to the older Arena.
And
it's still not Constructed.
Right. Like, it's still nowhere near constructed, guys. You're never gonna get actual like Jade Druid or Jade Shaman, but we're definitely a lot closer to constructed.
Because
So
what's one of the hallmarks of constructed? If you're a shaman, you throw two hexes in your deck. If you're a mage, you throw two frostbolts in your deck. Those are staples. Those are what the classes are about. No matter what deck you have, those are there. And Arena's getting more like that. And that's what causes the answer and response meta. It is all those spells. It is all these things that you can do.
yep. So that's sort of where the meta is, it feels as though we're like always butting up against the question of, is the new meta good? You know, that's the question at the bottom of this podcast that like,
all right.
it's the
Question
boogeyman.
from the GOAT. Let's do it. Question from the GOAT. Thanks to our Patreons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Let's wrap this up. We're gonna do a simple one because I want to keep this on topic.
Sure.
This is still like the new meta is just hitting. People want to hear about like what the meta actually is. Is the meta good? Like, is this a good meta? And I think you all know the answer. We don't think it's good, but there are good parts about the meta.
Okay.
It's definitely not like all bad. You know, it's not like Blizzard came in and took a giant dump on the arena.
No.
They tried to make it better in their way, and they succeeded in some areas, and they failed in some areas. And I want to highlight the areas in which it is good.
Sure. All right. Let's talk about the good first.
Focus on where
Yep.
it's bad. Right?
Let's talk about the good first. Okay.
Okay. So first, it's new and shiny. Gold cards, definite big hit.
Big hit. Love them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Gold cards. New meta, always good, right? They took action and they created a new meta when the old meta was, I don't know if the MSG meta ever got stale, but it has been around for a while. So I guess depending on how much you play the arena.
Right.
They took the care to add more synergies and combos, which actually, like, a lot of people say, like, oh, you can make good synergy and combo decks. But, like, decks are just better now. So you can also just make better pure value decks. So it's not like you were in the old arena meta, and now there are more synergy and combo decks, so things are cooler. It's that now everything's so powerful that if you're doing anything besides a value deck, you better have a really nice synergy or combo deck, or you're going to fail the same way. So they've upped the bar, and then they've allowed the synergies and combos to kind of match the bar, so that they're still viable. But your percent chance of getting a good combo deck now that matches the meta in terms of the win rate of your deck quality is the same, if not lower, than it was before. Like, it didn't actually get better. But what did happen is it got more separated. So your combo decks are more combo-y, right? Your value decks are more value-y.
Yep, definitely.
And that creates a very differentiated feel to the game, right? Which is a good thing. Even though combo decks are no more viable right now, and they're actually less viable than they were before this change. On the other hand, it is good for dragons, right? Like, that's the one combo that it's good for, because dragons were always like supplementary. They like made whatever you were doing a little better.
Yeah. Yep.
And because they only needed to be in your hand, they never required that many dragons to work, and there are more dragons now. So that's the one kind of synergy that really got a boost. But everything else, like including Jade, yes, it got better, but that just kept pace with how good a Jade, like if you're thinking about an 8 Jade card Jade deck now, that's about as good as a 6 Jade deck Jade in the previous meta, because everyone else's deck is better too.
Yeah.
So kind of a good thing. Like, I think overall that's a net positive. More legendaries. It is more swingy, but I do like seeing legendaries, and I don't think they're out of control.
No. Legendaries, I don't think, are out of control, right?
How many legendaries do you think on average you see in your opponent? Like, how many opponents until you see a legendary now?
Until you see a legendary?
Yeah.
I would say it's probably like 1 in every 3 games I see a legendary now, right? Yeah. Because right now it's like roughly 1 legendary per deck, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to get there, and they have to draw it first, and they have to want to play it, right?
Yep.
And it's tough for, like, people aren't going to be playing Millhouse Mana Storms. They're not going to be, maybe we'll see a Blood Mage Thanos or something, but we're going to see the big, the big guys, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Onyxias, the Deathwings, Ragnaros before he rotates out. Like, we're going to see that stuff. So the game has to get to that point first, and then they have to want to play it. So I'd say like 1 in every 3 games you'd see a legendary from your opponent.
Yep, I think that's about right. I'm with you. That's my observations as well, and that's a good amount.
Yeah,
Like before,
definitely.
we were rarely seeing legendaries, and it didn't need to be that way. This is fine. Like I think it was a very good like rate that they moved the legendaries. It shouldn't be any higher. It shouldn't be any lower.
I
This is fine.
Yep, I like it, especially when after we played Shadowverse, right? And we were just like, oh wow, like
Yep.
in their Take Two mode, being guaranteed a legendary is actually kind of cool because
Mhm.
legendaries are cool cards,
And
right?
they had much fewer legendaries in that game too.
Yeah,
So you're actually seeing like the same legendaries repeated, and it was still fine. And in Hearthstone, you have a whole ton of legendaries,
right,
and you
right.
never see them in the arena.
Yeah, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So that I think is the good part of the meta.
Oh, I think there's more good parts.
Okay, yeah, go on, go on.
Wow, you really hate Blizzard. You're just not letting me like say good
Well,
things
I'm always
about
prepared,
arena.
to brace myself for what's coming up. But go
Okay,
on.
okay. Well, brace yourself harder. Take a little more time with that. So one more thing that was good is that the overall rarity adjustment brought more cards into the meta,
Sure.
so that the loss of standard doesn't sting as much. Like it doesn't feel like we're seeing the same cards over and over again, like any more than we used to. Like maybe a tiny bit more than we used to, but it's not like people were saying the sky is falling, right? When
Oh no, no.
standard was moving in. That didn't happen. It doesn't even feel like it happens. This is not about like how like strategic the game is or whatever. Just in terms of diversity that you see in terms of cards, it's really about the same. And some people have commented that it actually feels like you're playing with more cards, and that's a good thing. So that I liked, and finally, I think this is the big part, and I don't think a lot of people have hit on this point. So I want to put a spotlight on this because I think it's definitely true. By moving the meta from 2 drops to 3 drops, Blizzard actually solved a huge problem that has always been an issue for the game itself, especially for Arena, and it's gotten especially worse over the course of last year. And that's the fact that player 2 sucked compared to player 1. It wasn't that bad. I think the average was at its worst like 8% or something of a different difference between the win rates. But that's a legit like significant amount, right? Like if that was the difference in win rate in constructed, that would be ridiculous. But this is arena, you can overcome an 8% difference. So now player 2 is at, I don't know if they're at an advantage, but they're at least at nowhere near as serious of a disadvantage as they used to be. And that's because player 2 is guaranteed to curve out on turn 2 because they could coin out 2 3s. And player 1 has to actually draw one of their very few 2 drops to be able to like use their turn 2 efficiently. That's a pretty big deal. The fact that the curve gets smoothed out for player 2 now is more meaningful than before.
Yes. Yep.
And we're also in a more value centric meta, which means the extra half card that player 2 gets, they get one extra card, but they don't go first. So it's like really just half a card, is actually more meaningful now. Because in the end, they're going to have half more of a card than your opponent. And if it just goes down to who's top decking more stuff, well, they have more stuff by a little bit, but they have more stuff. And this is actually making, when you de-emphasize tempo, right, and people aren't using all their mana the same way, the fact that player 1 has one extra mana is not like every single turn is really not as impactful.
Right. Especially when you have more answers as player 2, right?
Yep.
So it's not the snowball is either not as big because remember we're playing sort of in the non-commitment meta,
Mm-hmm.
and if they do sort of commit, that's your opportunity to punish them for it. Right?
Exactly.
So it plays both ways in terms of if they go all in and you don't have an answer, you know what? Yeah, that sucks. They took a risk and they get rewarded for it. But a lot of times, you have a higher percent chance of punishing them. And then, so what do you do, or what do I do, right? Thinking and sort of basically being like, well, I think I somewhat know the meta. I want to keep my good win rate. I'm not going to commit all in, right? But
No.
then because I'm going to trust my decision making. If ADWCTA was on the other side, he trusts his decision making, and then our game goes much longer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as it goes longer, sort of that mana advantage. If I'm player 1, I'm not using it to the full extent. First of all,
No. No,
yeah,
you shouldn't.
Right, I shouldn't, because if I'm using it, that means I am sort of going all in,
You are
right?
committing.
Right.
You have to
So
have a read before you commit.
right. So even if I'm
You have to know
spending,
your opponent before you commit.
oh my god, stop. Oh god, terrible. Ugh. It's like the next summer chick flick or something. Anyways,
Arena 7.1.
yeah.
On which turn will you commit to the board?
Yeah. Ryan Gosling, Emma Watson's next movie, fantastic. Anyways, terrible. So even if I'm using the 4 mana, right? Like let's say it's on turn 4, even if I'm using all the mana, I'm using it for the Tomb Spider. So it's not the
Yep.
Yeti, it's not anything. So you going into, I've used 4 mana. It goes to you and you're lagging behind. Now you have 4 mana, right? You can always deal with my 3/3. You could just Frostbolt it and then play something else. Or you could play your own 3/3, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't really matter. Like that's sort
But
of
you
the
can
game
commit
I'm
to
playing.
that at that point because you're putting a bigger card that's going to eat your opponent. You have put out a threat.
Right.
His 4/5 may not be a threat, but your 4/5 is a threat because he's already put a 3/3 down. Like, it opens up player two's options
Yes.
compared to where it was before. Whereas player two before was trying to like take over the game by flipping the board with a coin, and if that fails, you just try to keep up until you get to the end, or like something turns. So, in terms of the win rates, this is going to be a great change for player two. Now,
Hopefully.
this was
We'll see.
done by very heavily reducing the skill cap of player one and also significantly reducing the skill cap of player two. So there are costs, but if you're going to look at the stats and the win rates, it's going to look better. And if you're a player, you really don't want the game to be 8% decided by who ends up going first, right? That's not fun for the game.
Definitely not.
So, and this is 8% like persistent no matter how good you are. Like, if for really bad players, sometimes they like don't know how to use the coin and they only win when like they're going first. But like even the best players had more than a 5% differential between player one and player two.
Right. It just got really, really bad for sort of lower win rate players. But
yeah. And it got a little better in MSG, but it reached like an all-time like badness in Karazhan. And this really just solves the problem. So I want to commend Blizzard for doing that and getting away from the 2-drop meta. I don't know if this was intentional, but it's a really good side effect of not being in a 2-drop meta. Okay, so let's lead off with the bads.
all right. So here's what I think is bad about the meta. And this is actually going to differ from a lot of people's opinions because I've been reading the main subreddit, right?
Of course I love it. It's a bunch of casuals and constructive players. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Look, you get a ton of crazy stuff happening in the arena now, right?
Oh yeah. More so than before.
I was just from personal experience, I actually can't remember how many countless times I've played Doom, gotten Twisted Nethered, gotten Cabal Shadow Priest, and double brawled. Like I was watching Ratsmith stream, he got double brawled, and then into like just all the craziest stuff, right?
Yep.
Which definitely makes it more swingy.
Like I said, right? Like it's not about you can't have an advantage in the arena anymore because any advantage you have is illusory compared to what your opponent or you will draw the next turn.
So this is what ADWCTA was talking about at the beginning. So let's trace this back. If it's about answers and response, and it's about size, that goes back basically to the draft, right? So when you say the game has been decided by, like earlier on, it's actually, the percentages are tilted even earlier on during your draft, which means like, yes, there is certainly still the skill of what you select and everything, but in a value-oriented sort of threat and response meta, your deck matters more than ever now. What you are offered matters more than ever now. And that doesn't feel great, because even though you have more turns to play, it doesn't...
It feels worse.
It feels
you
worse.
Know the result is not up to you, but you have to keep playing turns. Why am I not just ending the game and letting me know the result?
Yeah, it creates this thing where it definitely prolongs the game, but I don't think it improves the quality of the game.
You make more decisions, but the decisions you make are less meaningful towards the win or loss of the game.
Basically. So
So yeah, like I don't know what to say about that besides that that's where the arena is right now, and that's one of the inevitable kind of losses that you have to take if you want to create a more swingy meta, right? That's the definition of swingy, unless the swing comes from you having to have built up something first, which Blizzard cards don't really allow for, except in very high synergy decks, right? Like,
yeah,
this is not the way to get to a skill-based swingy meta, which allows comeback mechanism, things like that. That was actually like MSG meta did that pretty well. It was the best we'd seen. I was hoping Blizzard would go more in that direction. Maybe they will with the next expansion, right? But right now, this meta is the opposite of that. It is the predetermined win or loss meta.
we've offered a
Um,
lot of names for this meta, by the way.
yes, it is because it really is if you know what you're doing. And if you're wondering, wait, but you guys just said like, oh, you got like 12 wins and all of that. Are you just saying like why is that not like proof that good players should be able to do well in this meta? How is it predetermined? Did you just get amazing decks? Well, we got good decks. Were they better than our opponent's decks? Always no. But one of the things that's either good or bad about this meta, I'm going to put it in the bad category, is that the meta is really easy right now.
It is very easy.
And
Yes.
we went over why. We went over why, right? Like it's an influx of players who don't really know how to play the arena. It's a huge percentage of arena players who are following old arena rules and so are doing it wrong now. And then it's the breakdown of Hearth Arena in this meta. Like all three of them combined to create a very easy meta for anyone who's not relying on those kinds of things. So like for people who really understand fundamentals about just like Hearthstone, right? Like not even just the arena, because it's not the arena. Whatever you knew about the arena before is only sort of going to help you now. So a constructive player can come in now and do like very well if he had a very good fundamental understanding of the game and like read up a bit about how arena works. And so this is, on one hand, maybe it's good if he just like wins, but it's less meaningful to me now because I know what the standard is. I know how easy the wins are to come by. I know I'm picking up a lot of like the low hanging fruit here, and it also like I don't know. I like a tough meta.
Yeah. And look, this is obviously a meta that I don't even know if it's going to have time to settle because we're going to have the expansion coming up soon, right? We haven't
Yeah,
even talked about the expansion, but that's for another
that's for
time.
another time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it just got
we have
announced.
plenty of times. We have
So,
plenty of time to talk about the
like,
expansion.
I don't even know if we'll talk about this, being a because metas typically take about like 3 weeks or so for us to
Yeah,
see where the dust settles, and by that time, the expansion will almost be here, if not like just here.
yeah, and on top of that, this was the biggest change ever, so it may even take longer than that to settle.
Right.
So
So
it's really like I don't know if we'll get to the point where it settles, but if we do, it'll be like literally in that last week.
yeah. So that's it. Like I don't know.
Oh, I have more. I have a whole list of why this is bad.
Right, right. Like so personally I just it just feels kind of bad, right?
Hmm?
And because I can try to make reads as well and let me know.
Oh, I
Maybe
make great reads right now. I love my
no.
reads.
I can make reads, but I don't know what to do about them a lot of the times
Right,
because
because you don't have a
you
lot of
make the
options.
read and then I'm just like I kind of have to play into it
Yep.
because they also have these 7 other cards, and if they play those, I'm even further behind. So it goes back to the point where it's like, yeah, like I'm making those reads as well, but I'm just seeing my impending doom, and
Yes.
sometimes it
For
actually is
longer.
doom.
Oftentimes it often is Doom when you're facing a Warlock. Doom gets a huge offering bonus these days. Um, but yeah, I mean, and I don't know. Look, I look at this and I fully understand now because of the 75% increase in spell damage why Blizzard took Flame Strike off the table. That, like, 50%, because that would have been ridiculous. Like, I'm sure they played like a few rounds internally and they were like, yeah, Flame Strike's a problem. Um, like, whether people are complaining or not about it is not going to be good. So they took that off. But they need to take other cards off too. Like, the whole large board clear thing, it's a real problem. And again, like I've said this before in the last one, like there's no reason to single flame strike out. There's a lot of cards that do essentially the same thing, especially in an answer response meta. All the cards that cleared your side of the board all got a lot better. Because you'll start the turn without anything that matters on your side of the board way more often than you did before. Because they're responding to your threats, right? If you ever put a threat down, it was responded to. So by definition, all the things left on your board, to the extent you have anything left at all, are things that don't matter too much. They're like already damaged minions, small minions, textless minions, right? That's all your opponent will leave on your board because other things are threats. And so those are things you either don't care about killing or you would just happily throw into something. So you have a lot of, I don't know, you have a lot of, like, Fellfire potions are everywhere now. It's kind of weird. And it's still so powerful. Warlock is, like we said, right? Like, Warlock's going to be totally different, and Warlock is totally different right now. It's a weird thing, and we're still adjusting to it. But one thing I want to talk about that kind of has to do with Warlocks and Mages and whatnot is that the class balance has gone out the window. Right, like we predicted this, and it's happening. Now, I don't think we got like all the class predictions right in terms of exactly where they go, and we don't usually get it right because that's really hard to do. But overall, right, Mage, Warlock at the top, that's still happening. Rogue, I think we were like a little higher on them before. I definitely don't think it's number one. I thought it may have been, but I would still put it in the top three. I think at most it falls into its like third tier place that it used to be as well. And Priest is doing a bit better than I thought. But that aside, like at the bottom, we were right on the bottom, and everyone was right on the bottom. Everyone predicted the doom of Warrior and Druid. That's happened. And it's just like Blizzard needs to do something about it at some point. Like I understand class balance was like at its best in like somewhere between Karazhan and MSG, and it's okay for it to get a little bad, and it's just 1 month, and you know new cards are going to come, and it's going to shake everything up anyway. So fine, but just so you guys know. Right now, the class balance is so off. Like, don't even go into the arena with one of the bad classes. Like, stick to the good classes. And there are enough good classes that there's some diversity, right? It's not like all classes are bad except for Mage, right? It's not what the case is. But, like, stick to Mage, Rogue, Warlock, Shaman, Priest. The other classes are significantly tougher to play.
Yep. All right. Did you have any more comments about the good or badness of the arena?
No, I think the core of this, and this is what I'm kind of worried about now. The core of this is that it feels more like constructed. And when you just look at the response, like in Arena HS, there was a first poll that was like, hey, what do you think about the arena? And the three of the four, like the highest voted post was like literally like someone breaking down what has happened in the arena practically without an opinion. And the other three talked about how bad the arena is. Like how much less skill it involves or how much more swingy it is and how bad it is. And then you look on like the main Reddit forums and you look at competitive HS. Competitive HS, by the way, is like a competitive format. So it's like there's very few arena players there. It's all constructed players that maybe play arena sometimes, but they're like take it very seriously. And main HS is obviously a mix of like pretty casual players, people who no longer play Hearthstone and are just hanging out for the lulz, and other people. They both had very favorable opinions about the changes, and it was overwhelming. In the same way that the arena subreddit was overwhelmingly disapproving of the change, the competitive constructed subreddit was overwhelmingly thinking that this was a good change. Not just that a change is good, it's nice that arena's a thing that we can play now without thinking it was abandoned, the way we think about it, but like the stuff that Blizzard has done is good. This is a good result.
Right. At the very least, when we talk about good, those people found it enjoyable. Right.
Yeah,
like more enjoyable. Yeah.
And they think that there's also more like this. They say things like there's more decision making involved. I feel like I have more control over the game. All these things that we know are not true because we've been playing arena for this long at this level, and they think that way not because they're dumb players, not because they don't get it at fundamental. They're good constructed players, but because that's how they view skill. That like 2% differential is very important to them in the difference that you can make. Because that is a huge part of the constructed skill. We know as arena players that yes, there is that 2% skill, here and that 2% skill there and that 5% skill there, but it used to be so much more if you just played arena and you saw what the arena was doing. And without like fully realizing like that context of it, I think it's very easy for constructed players to come in and be like, oh, this is good because X, Y, and Z. And it's certainly like, I think you really have to make it a slot machine to make it require like less thinking than constructed when you're actually in the game. Because you can't memorize patterns, right? Like that itself is a big stopping block. Stopping block is a big hurdle to get by. But because of this, because it's getting more like constructed, it's making it easier for constructed players to transition, and it's making it easier for casual players, most of whom play like way more constructed because you can do that for free. It's making a very favorable impression. And I'm getting the sense that maybe this was Blizzard's plan all along. Like, I think if you talk to people in Blizzard and they look at the responses, even if they've seen the Arena HS responses, they're going to come out, even if they've heard us talk, and even if they've heard like other Arena experts weigh in whatever fashion, they're going to come away from this thinking, hey, Arena numbers have spiked. We have so many people playing Arena right now. Our overall responses is overwhelmingly positive. This was a home run.
And you know what?
More things like this.
And you know what? That's not like, I totally understand them, right? Like, I totally understand them. And, even thinking from like I want this game to go on longer as well. You can even, say as an argument that like this keeps the game going for longer. Right?
It literally does.
It does. It actually does.
And we'll look at turn stats and it will back that up.
Yes.
And we agree. The games are longer.
Yes. So, like, what I don't enjoy about it, I can definitely see, like, how this impacts the game in the long run. And I will concede that, like, if it does make the general population happier and sort of it makes them like the game more, I'm like...
Let's say the arena population triples.
Right. Who am I to be like the miser, shaking my fist? It's like, these kids, get off my lawn.
Days, get off my lawn. Right. Go back to your constructed.
Like, okay, like, even when we deconstruct it and saying like, I don't like it because I can kind of see through it and see that like, your percentages, like the percentages are not as important. The later on you go, like basically after the draft, you have a better understanding of like where you're going to end up. And sort of this choice, a lot of the times it's more of an illusion of choice. The game just goes on for longer. You certainly have more turns to make these choices, but it's not as impactful. Look.
Like, sorry, go on.
If in the end, people, like the general population is happier and it extends the life of the arena, and I've thought about this as well. So when you brought this up, I was like, it's perfect. I'm willing to live with it, Like, I'm not too terribly happy about it, but look, it fits Blizzard's philosophy, and I think in the long run, like, I will be able to adjust, right? It's sort of me just sort of eulogizing it. It's like, like, we lost something, but I think we're gaining longevity here, and I'll take that.
If that's the price to pay, I mean, it makes me lose a bit more faith in people, but was Arena just too idiosyncratic compared to the main game, and just too like the skill cap was just too high? I guess I don't know.
Well, no, it didn't have to be, right? If they did something like this earlier,
no, they could have. Yeah, they could have done it some other way.
Right.
But if this is the results that they're going for, they're going to look at all the metrics and everything and the response, and they're going to like it. And there's nothing we can do about it. The fact that Arena requires more skill and is a more in-depth game, but only a third of the player play it, I don't think, given those two worlds, if that was like, if by keeping Arena high skilled, less player were going to play, if that's actually the direct result, and it's not just that like, if they just made golden cards in the Arena would have gained more popularity. Right. If like this was actually a price that had to be paid, which I'm very highly skeptical of because I have faith in people, then like no one's gonna convince Blizzard otherwise, and I don't know if I even want to stand in the way of that. But I fundamentally don't believe that people are that married to the idea that this game has to be a threat and response meta, that it has to be something that is familiar to them. And I'm hoping, like I said this before, right? That's why I like these changes. I'm hoping this gets people in the arena, they get hooked, and then they change it again because they have all the tools to change it. Not necessarily back to where it was, but to raise the skill cap. Because the skill cap right now is not at an all-time low. I would argue GVG was a lower skill cap when it comes to gameplay.
Yeah.
So it is not at an all-time low. But, and I actually thought it may have gone to an all-time low like before I actually played in the arena. Like in the previews, we said like there could really be an all-time low. So this is actually better than I thought. But it's still pretty low as far as the meta. Like Classic was more skillful. TGT was around the same skill. I would say TGT was probably a little more skill intensive, even in game. But this is like a pretty low point in arena history when it comes to skill. And it may just be us, right? Maybe we adjusted to the meta instantly because we're the ones that made the Lightforge that was 3 hours, and we saw all this, and not a lot of people saw it, and even fewer people internalized it or can internalize it in like the first couple of days. So they're not where we are, sitting here getting like 10 to 12 wins almost every run, and being like, oh, why are these games so long? And they'll actually have a lot of fun adjusting to this meta and all that. And that's all great, but people will adjust. This little spike of like people figuring this out is not going to last a long time. It's going to last us to the next meta, and then the next meta, this whole thing will last another like 4 weeks at most, probably more like 2 to 3. And then the reckoning is going to come, is what I'm saying. What people realize, at least arena players realize, that the skill cap is low. And at that point, that's when I'm hoping Blizzard makes these changes. Because, look, there's no reason for the skill cap to remain low unless it's fundamental that people think a high skill cap game is less fun. And I don't think that's the case. So if that's not the case, I see the response, the overwhelmingly positive response. Like, Blizzard clearly knows what they're doing in terms of drawing people to the arena better than we do. But I hope that they also keep in mind that there are plenty of people who know what things are like and who know what high skill and low skill are in the arena, and who are, if not hurt by this, like bored by this. Like, I have less fun in the arena now than I did before, and it's a new meta, and there are golden cards. I should be having more fun, and I'm not, because I know what's happening, and I know exactly, like, to someone, maybe making 4 decisions, each of which affects 1% chance to win, is a lot more fun than me making 1 decision affecting 10% chance to win. But I have much more fun with 10% chance to win, because that's how much control I have over the game.
Yep. All right. I think that's good. You know, I think we've sort of broken it down, provided sort of good perspective, and also sort of given our thoughts on it, right? You can tell we're having like a mini sort of existential crisis.
Right? I started this podcast saying I'm having an existential crisis. I kind of am. Because when it comes to like my role in the like arena and how I interact, like, I don't know, like, I know exactly what this meta is. We saw it before it came. It was pretty much, 90% as expected. But I didn't anticipate the scope of the reaction, right?
Right.
And now with the scope staring us in the face, I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is just, maybe we need to let it go. Maybe we need to just forget the fact that Arena was better, because this is still overall a fun game. Like, it's a net positive game, and to the extent that the net positive, this is like you go into ethics. I was a meta ethics major. You go to ethics and you're like, greatest number of good for the greatest people, right? Like, you apply some utilitarianism to this. Maybe we're the people that has to suffer for the greater good, and that's fine, because we were having way too much fun with this. And now we're spreading way more fun in the aggregate among a larger number of people, at the cost of, this like tiny minority of hardcore arena players that really liked all the stuff that was going on in the arena before and saw the fun in Curvestone.
You did just mention meta ethics and fun in the same sentence, in which I would say
meta ethics for 4 years, and it was some of the best times of my life academically.
This explains a lot about ADWCTA, guys. Fantastic. Anyways, That's it. Look, before we go down like because we can keep on talking about this forever. But before we
Okay.
do that, do you have any closing thoughts, or should we just end it right here?
No, I want you to give the closing thoughts because I've been talking too much. Because I just feel really strongly about this. This is like a turning point in the arena,
I think it
like the
is.
biggest one.
So I'll say this: um, these changes right now, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I am a fan of the fact that since the new year, Blizzard has done a lot. Like they have done so much to the arena, right? And it seems like this is just the beginning. And they have said, more changes are coming. Like this is almost like, them setting up the foundation and testing it. So I expect when we look back and we do the recap as we always do, like during the new year, we'll see this as the start of something huge, right? And I have no
Yes.
idea what's going to happen, but I know that it is almost impossible, like for them to just end it here. So that's exciting for me. In the case that these changes, some might be reverted, some might be further built upon, but the arena that I knew is gone right now, and the arena
Hmm.
of the future, I have no idea what's going to happen.
Right.
So I guess that's that. I guess those are my thoughts right now in terms of there's uncertainty mixed with a little bit of excitement, mixed with a little
Doesn't it?
bit of sadness.
Doesn't it scare you that this may be just the beginning, as in they can keep going in this direction? Not like that they went in this direction, and it's a matter of how far they go back,
Yeah,
but a matter of how far they go forward, and make this more like constructed and make it even more threat and response. Like, if these changes made people love it so much, why not add 30% more to it?
who
Maybe
knows,
people will
man.
like it 30% more.
Anyways, ADWCTA and I will keep on playing, or rather, when you listen to this, ADWCTA will be in Cuba, having
Yeah.
even more of an existential crisis.
Escaping, but freaking cold. It's gonna snow here or
I
something
know,
over the weekend.
escaping. But believe me, I will be playing more, and we will be back next week to further break down the meta, to further share our thoughts. And until then, this is Merps.
This is Adwicta, and the end is nigh. The end is nigh.
Good night, guys. Thank you.